Okay, everyone, welcome back to Chapter 10. We've got just a couple more lectures, and then it'll be time for our next exam. So bear that in mind. If you've got questions, comments, concerns, tell me now as opposed to later, so you still have time to prepare for the exam. This exam is going to have a fair amount of material on it, so it's relatively simple, but it's a lot to memorize. So make sure you allow ample time to do that. Don't try to cram it the night before, because if you do, you're not going to get enough sleep to consolidate those memories into a usable form, and disaster will ensue. But we're doing botany, not neurology, so let's get into the chapter. So, sexual reproduction in plants. In both animals and plants, sexual reproduction generates genetic variation among the offspring through meiosis and random fertilization, which we already talked about. Meiosis, random crossing over and segregation and all of that in previous chapters, so that should be familiar to you. We have this alteration of generations, so diploid into sporophyte stage. The spores are produced by meiosis, and then they divide by mitosis to become gametophytes. And then your haploid gametophyte stage, your gametes are produced by mitosis, and then upon fertilization, return to the N2 sporophyte. That whole mess is laid out pretty neatly in this figure on the right-hand slide. Flowering plants, the sporophyte is the dominant generation and is the one that bears flowers. And flowers are reproductive structures that produce two kinds of spores. You've got your microspores that undergo mitosis and become pollen grains, and that's the male gametophyte, which makes good sense that that's the smaller one, because, a sperm has a lot less to it than an egg. And then your megaspore, which undergoes mitosis to become a microscopic embryo, essentially, which are the female gametophytes. And the female gametophyte is retained within the flower. So then the female gametophyte's retained in the flower, the male gametophyte, the pollen must be transported. And that's either, just blown in the wind, so now you know that thin layer of gunk on your windshield in the spring is male plant reproductive cells. So you're welcome for having that image in your head. So either they're blown by the wind, in which case, they end up everywhere, or they're transported by a pollinator, or, on, like for cockerels, they're just kind of carried around by the fur, whatever happens to come by. But upon fertilization, the structure around the embryo sac develops into a seed, and then the seed is enclosed by fruit, which aids in dispersal. Something eats it, goes through their digestive tract, gets dropped elsewhere. The fruit is usually from a second ovary. So, like when you're eating a strawberry, you're eating plant ovary. So, again, you're welcome for that mental image. And then when the seed germinates, a new sporophyte emerges. So, again, pretty decent illustration over here on the right. Adaptation to land environment. So the life cycle for flowering plants is adapted to land existence. And the big thing for that is you have to survive being dried out, because, you went from an aqueous environment to land. And yeah, there's water here, but, nothing like being immersed in it. So the way you can do this is with the microscopic gametes that develop within the sporophyte. The pollen grains are not released until a thick wall develops, and the seed coat protects the embryo until conditions favor growth. So part of this adaptation to land is using flowers. So we have to talk about the anatomy of the flower here a bit. So sepals are the leaf-like structures that protect the developing bud. The petals attract pollinators. Stamen is the male portion of the flower. The anther produces pollen grains, and then the filament is the slender stalk that supports the anther. And then the carpels, the female portion of the flower. The stigma is the enlarged sticky knob thingy here. The style is the stalk, and then the ovary down here encloses one or more ovules. And then again here for flower, if the petals are in multiples of 3, then it's a monocot, and if it's in multiples of 4 or 5, it's a eudicot. Flowers have sepals, petals, stamens, and carpels. Flowers that contain sepals, petals, stamens, and carpels are called complete flowers. If you're missing any one of these things, then it's an incomplete flower. For monocots, the plant has both a stamen and a carpellate on those flowers, and if they're on if the stamen and carpellate are on separate plants, it is a dicot. So basically, the monocots have both of these on the same flower, and then the dicot will have them on 2 separate plants. So it's another means of telling them apart. Pollination and fertilization. So the male gametophyte, which is the pollen, is transported to the female gametophyte, and it's either wind-blown or carried by an animal. Pollination is the transfer of pollen from an anther to a stigma. So self-pollination, the pollen came from the same plant, and cross-pollination, it comes from a different plant. And adaptations for cross-pollination, so maybe assisted by a particular pollinator. So there are quite a few plants that only one species of insect or a particular hummingbird or something is capable of pollinating. And that just makes sure that they cross-pollinate instead of reproducing with themselves. Or they have a very particular color, odor, or their nectar in order to attract pollinators. So basically what you end up having to have to do is you take your pollen grains and you attach them to the stigma. And that will then germinate, forming a pollen tube, and then 2 sperm will travel through the pollen tube to the ovary, and then you have your double fertilization. One unites with the egg, producing a zygote. The other unites with a polar nuclei, forming the endosperm, and that nourishes the embryo and seedling as they develop. So monocot versus eudicot. Eudicot, you've got 2 cotyledons, also known as a dicot. Cotyledons store nutrients that the embryo uses, and then the endosperm disappears. For the monocot, you do not store food, and the cotyledon absorbs food molecules from the endosperm and passes them to the embryo. A seed is typically enclosed by fruit, which aids in dispersal, and the fruit is derived from an ovary and some other flower parts, and serves to protect and disperse the offspring, to increase reproductive success. The seeds must disperse far away from the parent plant. And there's a few ways you can do this. So you have hooks or spines that attach to fur or clothing. You can pass through the digestive tract of an animal, or you can be gathered and buried by animals. Squirrels actually have really terrible memories. So most of the acorns they bury are actually, they don't actually end up coming back to eat them later, because they can't remember where they put them. So basically they're just passively planting trees all the time. See, they can also be carried by wind or water. That's the whole point of coconut, is they float. So you drop them down in the ocean and let it bob around and hopefully finds another island. A lot of seeds have serotonin on the outer coat of them. And serotonin is kind of one of those things. The basic rule of biology is to be as efficient as possible. And so one of the ways you can do this is, instead of creating a totally different messenger each time you need to do something different, you can use one that you've already got and just have it do a different thing in a different place. So serotonin in your brain regulates, your focus and your mood and whatnot. That's why some antidepressants are SSRIs, or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. So that way your serotonin kind of floats around in your brain a little longer. That's one function of it. Wasp venom contains large amounts of serotonin, because when it's directed or injected into muscle tissue, it causes extreme pain and muscle spasms. Or if it's in your digestive tract, it speeds up your peristalsis and moves everything along through your digestive system significantly quicker. So you put that in your seed coat, and the organism that ate the seed will pass it before it is digested. So it's a really handy way of making sure that the seed actually, makes it to where it's supposed to go instead of ending up as food. Okay, so fruits and seed dispersal. So simple fruits are derived from a simple ovary of a single carpel or a compound ovary from several fused carpels. And so you've got things like legumes, dry fruits, fleshy fruits, accessories, like a strawberry. And then compound fruits are developed from several individual ovaries. Then you can form like aggregates or multiple fruits. So dispersal, some plants have seeds that are designed to kind of float on the air or just kind of glide to where they're going. Or, you stick a coconut in the ocean current and eventually it's going to bump into land. Okay, so germination. So when a seed germinates, a new sporophyte or seedling emerges, and seeds germinate when environmental conditions are correct. So in temperate zones, they must be exposed to periods of cold weather to end dormancy. In deserts, germination occurs only when there's enough moisture. In some places, like thick forests, dormancy is ended by intense heat, as in shortly after a forest fire. Some seeds do not germinate until they've been dormant for a specific period of time, and dormancy is just being defined here as a time period in which no growth occurs, even if conditions are favorable. Okay, so this next bit here gets to be a little more technical, I guess, because this we're talking more about plant hormones, and you will need to know the names of these hormones and what they do, and where they're produced, and that sort of thing. So bear that in mind. So control of growth and responses. So they respond to environmental stimuli such as light, gravity, season changes, and usually that causes a change in their growth pattern. And these changes are regulated by plant hormones. A hormone is a small chemical molecule, or a small organic molecule that serves as a chemical signal between tissues and cells. And the best known here are auxins, gibberellins, cytokines, abscisic acid, and ethylene. So auxins are produced in the shoot apical meristem and are found in young leaves, flowers, and fruits. And they alter many aspects of growth and development. They promote apical dominance, where the shoots grow from the top, and they promote the growth of fruits, and are involved in photo and gravitropism. Tropism means movement. So phototropism is, moving to or away from light, though I cannot think of any plant that moves away from it, so just associate phototropism with moving towards light. And then gravitropism, plants typically move, opposite gravity. It's one of the ways they orientate themselves, which is why it's so difficult to grow plants in space. They don't really know what to do and have great difficulty orientating themselves, and it turns into this immature, crooked, twisted mess. Gravity is highly essential for most organisms for most life as we know it. So auxins are responsible for phototropism, and basically what ends up happening is when the plant is exposed to unidirectional light, then the auxins move to the shady side, and that causes the dark side to grow faster, which means that the plant will then bend towards the sunlight. Gibberellins are found in young leaves, roots, and embryos, seeds, fruits, that sort of thing. They're growth-promoting hormones that cause elongation, and by applying gibberellins, you can promote stem elongation, cause dwarf plants to grow. You can wake a plant from dormancy, or a seed, I should say. And you can promote the breakdown of starch to release sugars for seed germination. Cytokines. So cytokines do a ton of things, but for this context, they promote cell division and are isolated from actively dividing tissues of roots and seeds. They prevent aging in leaves, initiate leaf growth, and interact with auxins to affect the differentiation of plant tissues. Abscisic acid inhibits growth and is stimulated by stress, which makes good sense. If you're stressed out and you don't have the resources, or if the conditions are not optimal for survival, then you're not going to be wasting resources on growing. So high concentrations promote dormancy and inhibit germination. It also influences how the plants regulate water. If it's produced in the roots, it can signal low soil moisture concentrations and trigger plants to conserve water by closing the stomata. Ethylenes does a bunch of stuff, but basically it functions as it's a gas, so it can act as a distance or at a distance, so plants can affect each other with it, and it stimulates enzymes such as cellulase. Basically, just know that it ripens fruit. If you put an apple in a bag, like a brown paper bag with some bananas, the bananas will ripen faster because the apple is giving off ethylene. That's just really all you have to know about it. Plant responses to environmental stimuli. So environmental stimulus determines the seasonality of growth, reproduction, and dormancy in plants, and they fosters the survival of the plant and the species in a particular environment. So they can respond to light, day length, gravity, and touch. So again, phototropism, growth in response to light, gravitropism in response to gravity, thigmotropism in response to touch. If it's positive phototropism, then you are moving towards the light. If it's negative phototropism, you're moving away from it. But again, I can't think of any plant off the top of my head that would move away from light. Flowering in angiosperms occurs in response to environmental seasonal changes, and this is regulated by the photoperiod, which is the ratio of day to night in a 24-hour time period. And plants can be divided into 3 photoperiods. So you've got short day, long day, and day neutral plants. Short day plants flower when the day is shorter than a critical length. Long day plants are when it's longer than the critical length, and neutral, they don't give a hoot, they just do their thing. And experimentally, it appears to be that this is determined based on the period of continuous darkness, not the light that controls the flowering, which makes good sense because the period of darkness is the period in which you do not have new resources coming in. So that would be a very good way to determine when is the appropriate time for flowering. So that is it for Chapter 10. Questions, comments, concerns, let me know as soon as possible, and I'll see you next time.